I didn't plan on meeting Adam that night. If anything, I almost wasn't there at all. It had been one of those long, pointless days where everything feels slightly off. Work dragged, my phone kept dying, and by the time evening hit, I just wanted to go home, heat something up, and disappear into a show I wouldn't even remember the next day. But my friend insisted I get out. Fresh air, he said. You've been stuck in your own head all week. So I went. Not to a party or anything loud, just a late walk through the Riverside Park. It was quiet, dimly lit, the kind of place people pass through rather than stay in. I figured I'd walk for 20 minutes, clear my head, and leave. That should have been the whole story. I remember the exact moment things shifted. There was a sharp sound like metal hitting pavement followed by a low, frustrated voice somewhere ahead of me. Not loud enough to draw attention, but enough to break the silence of the path. I almost ignored it. That's the part that stuck with me later. How easy it would have been to just keep walking. But something about the tone made me stop. I turned the corner and saw him. Adam was crouched near the edge of the path, next to a bike that had clearly seen better days. One of the wheels was bent at an angle that didn't make sense, and his hand was pressed against his forearm like he was trying to steady it. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. We just stared at each other for a second. "You good?" I asked, because that's what you say, even when it's obvious someone isn't. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "Yeah, totally. Just great evening." I stepped closer, taking in the situation properly now. The bike, the way he was holding his arm, the slight tension in his posture like he was trying not to show how much it hurt. "That doesn't look great," I said, nodding toward the wheel. "Yeah, well," he muttered, "neither does my timing." I hesitated for a second, then crouched down a little to get a better look. "Did you fall?" "Hit a pothole I didn't see," he said. "Will gave up on life." I followed shortly after. Despite everything, there was something dry in the way he said it, like he was used to downplaying things. "Can you move your arm?" I asked. He tried. His expression tightened for a split second before he forced it neutral again. "I can. Just not a fan of it." "Okay," I said slowly. "That's not exactly reassuring." He looked at me then, properly this time, like he was assessing whether I was someone he should brush off or actually accept help from. "I'll figure it out," he said. "It's not far. You're not riding that anywhere," I pointed out. Wasn't planning to. There was a pause. I could have left. He hadn't asked for help. He wasn't making a scene. It would have been easy to nod, say good luck, and keep walking. Instead, I heard myself say, "Where are you trying to get to?" He blinked, like he hadn't expected that. "About 15 minutes that way," he said, nodding down the path. "With a broken bike and a possibly injured arm?" "When you say it like that, it sounds worse than it is." "It is worse than it sounds," I said. That got a small smile out of him. "Okay," he admitted. "Yeah, it's not ideal." I stood up and ran a hand through my hair, thinking, "There's a 24-hour pharmacy about 5 minutes back. We could at least clean that up and make sure your arm isn't something serious." He hesitated. "I don't want to be a problem," he said. "You're already a problem," I replied. "Now I'm just deciding if I'm part of the solution." That surprised a laugh out of him short real. "Kevin," I added, gesturing to myself. "Adam." There was another pause, but this one felt different. Less guarded. "Okay, Kevin," he said finally. "Lead the way." We walked slowly, me carrying the front of the bike while he guided it with one hand. Up close, I could see the scrapes on his palm, the faint tension in his jaw every time he moved too quickly. "You do this often?" he asked after a minute. "Carry strangers' broken bikes through the park?" "Yeah." "Is this like a hobby?" "Only on Tuesdays," I said. "You're lucky." He huffed a quiet laugh. For a while, we just walked in silence. Not awkward, just calm. The kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. "Thanks," he said eventually. "For what?" "For not walking past." I shrugged, even though he couldn't really see it from the angle we were in. Could have gone either way. "Yeah," he said softly. "It usually does." Something about that stuck with me. We reached the pharmacy, and I pushed the door open with my shoulder. The bright lights inside felt almost too harsh after the dim path outside. I set the bike aside near the entrance. "Sit," I said, pointing to a chair near the wall. "Yes, sir," he replied, but he did it. I grabbed some antiseptic, bandages, basic stuff, and came back over. For a second, I hesitated, holding the supplies. "You okay with this?" I asked. "Or do you want to handle it?" He looked at me, then at his scraped hand. "I think I'd rather not mess it up," he admitted. "So yeah, if you don't mind." I nodded and crouched in front of him. His hand was warm, slightly tense when I took it, but he didn't pull away. Tell me if it hurts, I said. It already does, he replied. So you're good. Very comforting. Glad I could help. I cleaned the scrape carefully, trying not to rush it. He stayed quiet, watching me more than his own hand. You always this calm? He asked after a moment. Not really, I said. I just pretend well. Good skill. Comes in handy when you're dealing with people who crash their bikes at night. He smiled again, softer this time. When I finished, I wrapped the bandage and leaned back slightly. There. Not pretty, but functional. Story of my life, he said. I let out a small laugh, then glanced at his arm. We should still get that checked if it keeps hurting. I will, he said. Then, after a beat, probably. Adam. Okay, fine. I will. I stood up, and for a second, neither of us moved. The moment lingered. It was strange. I'd only known him for maybe 20 minutes, but it didn't feel like that. There was something easy about him. Something familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Do you still need to get home? I asked. He nodded. Yeah. I looked at the bike, then back at him. I'll walk you, I said. You don't have to. I know, I cut in. I'm choosing to. He studied me for a second, like he was trying to understand something. Okay, he said quietly. We stepped back out into the night, the air cooler now, the path quieter than before. And I didn't know it yet, but that walk, the one I almost never took, the moment I almost ignored, was about to change everything. We didn't talk much at first after leaving the pharmacy. The night had settled into that deep kind of quiet where even your footsteps sound louder than they should. I carried the bike again, a little more carefully this time, while Adam walked beside me, keeping his injured arm close to his body. You always this stubborn? I asked after a few minutes. Only when I'm injured and being escorted by strangers, he replied. Good to know there's a system. There's always a system, he said. I glanced at him. There was something calm about the way he spoke, even now. Like he was used to dealing with things on his own and didn't quite know what to do when someone stepped in. You live alone? I asked. Yeah, he said. You? Same. He nodded, like that made sense. We walked a little further before he spoke again. I really would have tried to get home like that, you know. I figured, I said. Would have taken me forever. Also figured. He smiled faintly. You're very intuitive. I've met your type before. Oh yeah, he asked. And what type is that? I'm fine even when I'm clearly not type. He let out a quiet breath, almost amused. That obvious? Only if you're paying attention. There was a pause. Most people don't, he said. Something about the way he said it made my chest feel tight. Not in a dramatic way, just enough to notice. I did, I replied. He didn't answer right away, but I saw the slight shift in his expression. Softer, less guarded. We reached a quieter street, the kind lined with older buildings and dim streetlights. He slowed down a bit, then nodded ahead. Almost there. Good, I said. Because this bike is starting to feel personal. That's fair. A few steps later, he stopped in front of a small apartment building. Nothing fancy, just a simple entrance with a flickering light above the door. This is me. I set the bike down gently and stepped back. For a second, neither of us moved. It should have been the end of it. A quick thanks, maybe an awkward goodbye, and then we'd both go back to our separate lives. But it didn't feel like that. Hey, he said. Yeah. Do you want to come up for a minute? He asked. Then quickly added, just to make sure I don't pass out or something. You seem invested now. I raised an eyebrow. You're not going to pass out. Probably not, he admitted. But I might make bad decisions like trying to fix that bike tonight. That I believe. He smiled slightly. So, I hesitated, but not because I didn't want to. More because I realized I did. Yeah, I said. For a minute. We walked inside, the building quiet except for the faint hum of old lights. His apartment was on the second floor. He unlocked the door with one hand, a little awkwardly, then stepped aside to let me in. Welcome to the mess, he said. It wasn't actually messy, just lived in. A jacket thrown over a chair, a couple of books on the table, a half-finished mug of something sitting near the window. I've seen worse, I said. Low bar, but I'll take it. He closed the door behind us, and for a moment, the shift from outside to inside felt noticeable. Quieter. Closer. Sit, he said, nodding toward the couch. You just like telling me what to do, don't you? Only when I'm injured, he replied. Right? The system. I sat anyway. He moved around the apartment carefully, grabbing a bottle of water and tossing it to me before sitting down on the other end of the couch. For a few seconds, we just existed there. It was strange, comfortable, but also charged in a way I couldn't quite explain. "How's the arm?" I asked. "Still attached," he said. "So that's promising. High standards." I try to keep them realistic. I shook my head slightly, then took a sip of water. "You should still get it checked tomorrow," I said. "I will. You said that earlier." "I meant it this time." "Sure." He smiled again, then leaned back slightly, exhaling. "Today was not supposed to go like this," he said. "How was it supposed to go?" "Work, gym, home," he said. "Normal. Quiet. And instead you crashed your bike and got rescued by a guy who won't stop giving you instructions." "Exactly." I smirked. "Sounds like an upgrade." He turned his head to look at me. "Yeah," he said, quieter now. "It kind of does." That lingered. I looked away first, focusing on the room, the window, anything that wasn't the way his tone had shifted. "So," I said, clearing my throat slightly, "you always ride through the park at night?" "Sometimes," he said. "Helps me think." "About stuff," he replied. Then added, "You?" "I usually just overthink at home," I said. "Less risk of injury." "Debatable," he said. "Your brain sounds dangerous." "It is." He laughed softly. Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It felt like something building, slowly, without either of us rushing it. "I almost didn't go out tonight," I admitted after a moment. Yeah. Yeah. Was going to stay in." He nodded. "I almost didn't take that route. Probably would have saved your bike." "Probably," he agreed. Another pause. "But then we wouldn't be here," he added. I glanced at him. There was again that feeling, like something small but important had just shifted into place. "Guess not," I said. We held each other's gaze for a second longer than necessary. Not uncomfortable, just aware. Then he leaned back, breaking it gently. "Well," he said, "thanks for not letting me bleed out in the park." "You're welcome," I replied. "I do that sometimes. Rescue random guys at night. Only the ones with bad luck and worse timing." "Lucky me." I stood up slowly, sensing the moment starting to settle into something more grounded. "I should probably head out," I said. He nodded, but there was something reluctant in it. "Yeah, you've done enough for one night." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Hey," I said, turning back slightly. "If that arm gets worse, don't ignore it." "I won't. I mean it." "I know," he said. There was a brief silence. "Kevin." "Yeah." "Can I get your number?" he asked. Simple question. But the way he said it careful, like it mattered more than he wanted to show hit harder than it should have. "Yeah," I said. "Of course." I stepped back toward him, and we exchanged phones, typing in our contacts. "Now I can properly thank you later," he said. "You already did." "I'll do it again." I handed his phone back. "Take care of yourself, Adam." "You too, Kevin." I left after that. But the moment the door closed behind me, I knew something had changed. Because this didn't feel like a random encounter anymore. It felt like the beginning of something neither of us had planned, but somehow both stepped into anyway. I didn't expect him to text me that soon. I'd barely made it halfway home when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it habit, but something told me to check. "Adam." Made it to the couch without collapsing. "Thought you should know." I smiled before I could stop myself. There was something about the message. Casual, but intentional. Like he didn't want the conversation to end with the door closing. I typed back. "Me. Proud of you. Next step. Don't try to fix the bike tonight." The reply came almost immediately. "Adam. No promises." I shook my head, still smiling, and kept walking. That should have been it. A short exchange. A polite follow-up after an unexpected encounter. But it didn't stop there. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because my brain wouldn't stay quiet. I kept replaying everything from the night before. The way he'd looked at me when I said I noticed. The pause before he asked for my number. That quiet shift in his voice when he said we wouldn't be here. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt specific. I grabbed my phone, half expecting nothing, but there it was. "Adam." Arm still attached. "Slightly more painful today." "You were right." I exhaled a quiet laugh. "Me. I usually am." A few seconds passed. "Adam." Annoying trait. "Me. You'll get used to it." There was a pause before the next message came. "Adam. Doctor today. Don't worry." That did something to me. Small, but noticeable. He didn't have to say that. "Me. Good. Let me know what they say." This time, the pause was longer. Then, "Adam. You actually care, huh?" I stared at the screen for a second. It wasn't a joke. "Not really." "Me. Yeah. I do." Three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, Adam. Okay, just that. But it didn't feel small. The day dragged. Work felt slower than usual, like everything was happening slightly out of sync with me. I kept checking my phone without meaning to, wondering if he'd text again, if the doctor said something serious, if. I stopped myself. This was ridiculous. I'd known him for less than a day. But that didn't stop the feeling. Late afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Adam. Not broken. Just a bad strain. I get to suffer in peace. I leaned back in my chair, tension easing a little. Me. Congratulations. You survived. Adam. Barely. It's been dramatic. Me. I believe that. There was a short pause. Then, Adam. Hey. I waited. Adam. Can I ask you something? I felt that same subtle shift again. Like the conversation was about to move somewhere else. Me. Go ahead. A longer pause this time. Then, Adam. Why did you stop? I frowned slightly. Me. Stop what? Adam. Last night. You said it yourself, you almost kept walking. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, thinking. It was a simple question, but it didn't feel like one. Me. I don't know. Something felt off. Another pause. Adam. Off how? I hesitated, then decided to be honest. Me. Like if I didn't stop, I'd regret it. The typing dots stayed for a while this time. When the message finally came through, it was shorter than I expected. Adam. Yeah, that was it. But somehow, it said more than a full explanation would have. We didn't text constantly after that. It wasn't one of those conversations that never ends. It was spaced out, intentional, like neither of us wanted to flood it with noise. But every message mattered. That evening, I found myself walking again. Same park, same path. I told myself it was just routine, but I knew better. I slowed down near the spot where I'd found him the night before. The pothole was still there. The path looked completely normal. Quiet. Empty. Like nothing had happened. And yet, careful, a voice said behind me. I turned. Adam. Standing there like he'd been part of the scene the whole time. Seriously? I said, blinking. You just appear now? He smiled slightly. Figured I'd check if the pothole was still ruining lives. You came back here? So did you, he pointed out. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Fair. He stepped a little closer, hands in his pockets this time, his movements more relaxed than the night before. How's the arm? I asked. Still attached, he said. Slightly more dramatic than necessary, but functional. Good. There was a small pause. Then he glanced at the ground, then back at me. I wasn't sure if you'd be here, he admitted. I let out a quiet breath. Yeah, me neither. That truth sat between us for a second. Real. Unfiltered. He nodded slightly, like he understood more than I'd said. Guess we both made the same bad decision twice, he said. I smirked faintly. Or a good one. He held my gaze. Yeah, he said, softer now. Maybe that. We stood there, in the same place everything had started, but it felt completely different now. Less accidental. More chosen. And that's when I realized something. The first night, I stopped because something felt off. Tonight, I stopped because something felt right. We didn't move right away. It wasn't awkward. That was the strange part. Standing there again, in the same spot where everything had started, it felt natural. Like this had quietly become something we were both stepping into without needing to explain it. You come here a lot? Adam asked after a moment. Not really, I admitted. Just when I need to think. He nodded. Same. A small pause. Then I gestured ahead. Walk. He didn't hesitate. Yeah. We fell into step beside each other, slower than the night before. No broken bike this time. No urgency. Just time. The air was cooler, and the park felt different tonight. Less like a place you pass through, more like somewhere you choose to stay. You didn't have to come back, he said after a while. Neither did you. Yeah, but I had a reason, he replied. I glanced at him. Which is? He looked forward, hands still in his pockets. I wanted to see if it felt the same, he said. And he exhaled softly. It does. That landed heavier than I expected. I looked ahead again, trying to ignore the way my chest tightened slightly. Good or bad? I asked. He smiled faintly. I'm still figuring that out. Helpful. I try. We walked a few more steps in silence before he spoke again. You're not what I expected, he said. That sounds like it could go either way. It's not a bad thing, he added quickly. Just, most people don't stop. Or if they do, it's quick. Surface level. You didn't feel like that. I shrugged. You didn't feel like that either. He glanced at me. How so? You didn't brush it off, I said. Most people would have just said they're fine and pushed through. I did say that. Yeah, I nodded. But you stayed. He was quiet for a second. I don't usually, he admitted. I figured. That familiar look crossed his face again, the one that meant he was thinking about something deeper than he was saying out loud. You always read people like this? He asked. Only when they're obvious. I'm not obvious. I raised an eyebrow. You came back to the exact same spot the next day. He huffed a quiet laugh. Okay, maybe a little. We reached a bench and slowed down. Neither of us sat immediately. Can I ask you something? He said. Depends. Why does this feel like more than it should? He asked. I didn't answer right away, because I'd been thinking the same thing. I don't know, I said honestly. But I noticed it too. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something for him. I don't usually, he started, then stopped. Usually what? He glanced at me, then away again. Come back, he said. Not like this. There was something in his voice, careful, but real. Yeah, I said quietly. Me neither. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything we weren't saying yet. He sat down first, leaning forward slightly, resting his good arm on his knee. I followed a second later, leaving just enough space between us to feel it. You ever have something happen that feels small in the moment, he said. But then later you realize it wasn't small at all. Yeah, I said. This feels like that. He nodded. Exactly. We sat there for a while, watching nothing in particular. A couple walked past, laughing quietly. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal life. But this, whatever this was, felt separate from all of it. Hey, he said after a bit. Yeah. I'm glad you didn't keep walking. The words were simple, but the way he said them wasn't. I looked at him, really looked this time. Me too, I said. And for a second, everything felt still. Not in a frozen way. In a steady way, like something had settled into place. He shifted slightly, turning toward me just enough that I could see the change in his expression. Less guarded now. More certain. You know what's weird? He said. What? I don't feel like I just met you. I let out a quiet breath. Yeah, same. He smiled a little, but it wasn't light. It meant something. Dangerous, he added. Why? Because it makes you trust something you probably shouldn't trust yet. That doesn't mean it's wrong, I said. No, he agreed. It just means it matters. That word hung there. Matters. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence after that. We didn't need to. After a while, he leaned back slightly, looking up at the sky. So what now? He asked. I followed his gaze for a second before answering. I don't think this is a figure it all out tonight kind of thing. He smiled faintly. Good. Because I definitely don't have the answers. Same. Another pause. Then he looked back at me. Do you want to get coffee tomorrow? He asked. Simple. Direct. But there was something underneath it, something steady. Yeah, I said. I do. He nodded, like he'd expected that, but was still relieved to hear it. Okay. We sat there a little longer, neither of us in a hurry to leave. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like we were passing through something. It felt like we were staying. And whatever this was, it was only just beginning. I got there too early. I knew it the second I checked the time for the third time in under a minute. The cafe wasn't even busy, yet just a few people scattered around, the low hum of conversation and coffee machines filling the space. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Because this wasn't just coffee. This was something else. I picked a table near the window, somewhere I could see the door without making it obvious. My foot kept tapping against the floor, and I had to force myself to stop. You're overthinking it, I told myself. But that didn't help. The door opened, and there he was. Adam. He scanned the room for half a second before his eyes landed on me. And the moment they did, something in his expression shifted, subtle, but real, like he'd been looking for me specifically. Hey, he said as he walked over. Hey. We both paused for a second, like neither of us was sure if this should feel normal yet. You've been here long? He asked. Not really. I lied. He smiled slightly, like he didn't believe me, but wasn't going to call it out. Good, he said, setting his phone down on the table. I didn't want to be the late one. You're not. Another small pause. Then he nodded toward the counter. Coffee first. Yeah. We stood at the counter side by side, the space between us smaller than it had been the night before. Not touching, not anything like that, just aware. What are you getting? He asked. Something strong enough to fix poor life choices, I said. He huffed a quiet laugh. Good. Same. We ordered, stepped aside, and waited. You look less injured, I said. Don't be fooled, he replied. I'm just better at pretending today. Consistent. I try. Our drinks were called, and we went back to the table. This time, sitting across from each other felt different than the bench in the park. Closer, somehow. More intentional. So, he said, wrapping his hand around his cup, this is weird. Yeah, I agreed. But not bad weird. No, I said. Not bad. He nodded, like he was relieved we were on the same page. I kept thinking about what you said yesterday, he admitted. Which part? That you felt like you'd regret it if you didn't stop, he said. I leaned back slightly. Yeah. He nodded. I've had that feeling before. I just don't usually listen to it. And this time you did. Yeah, he said, holding my gaze. Because of you. That landed. I didn't look away this time. You came back too, he added. So I guess it wasn't just me. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. There it was again, that steady, building feeling. Not rushed. Not overwhelming. Just real. He took a sip of his coffee, then set it down. Can I be honest with you? He asked. You've been doing that so far. Yeah, he said. I want to keep doing that. Then go ahead. He hesitated for a second, then said, I don't usually let things matter this quickly. I didn't interrupt. But this, he gestured lightly between us, it already does. The way he said it wasn't dramatic. It was calm, certain, and that made it hit harder. I was thinking the same thing, I admitted. He exhaled slowly, like that took some weight off his chest. Okay, he said. Good. We sat in that for a moment. No rushing past it. No pretending it wasn't happening. Does that freak you out? I asked. A little, he said honestly. You? Yeah. He smiled slightly. At least we're consistent. Again. We both laughed quietly, the tension easing just enough. So what do we do with that? He asked. I thought about it for a second. I don't think we try to define it too fast, I said. But we also don't ignore it. He nodded immediately. Yeah, that makes sense. Just see where it goes. Together, he asked. There was something in his tone. Not unsure. Just careful. Yeah, I said. Together. That word settled between us, steady and clear. He leaned back slightly, watching me for a moment like he was taking something in. You know what's strange? He said. What? I feel calmer than I expected. I tilted my head. Why wouldn't you? Because usually when something matters, it's messy, he said. Uncertain. And this isn't. It is, he said, but not in a bad way. I nodded. Yeah, I get that. Another pause. Then he smiled faintly. I'm really glad I crashed that bike, he said. I let out a quiet laugh. That's a terrible takeaway. I know, he said. But still. I shook my head, but I was smiling too. Guess I should thank the pothole, I said. Maybe not directly, he replied. But yeah, we stayed there longer than we needed to. Talking about small things at first, work, routines, the usual. But underneath it, there was something else. Something steady. Something growing. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something that could disappear as quickly as it started. It felt like something that had already taken root. Before we left, he looked at me, a little more serious again. Hey, he said. Yeah. I meant what I said, he told me. I don't want to rush this. But I don't want to pretend it's nothing either. I don't want that either. He nodded. Okay, he said. We stood up together, stepping back out into the day. And this time, when we walked side by side, it didn't feel accidental anymore. It felt like a choice we were both making. After that coffee, things didn't explode into something dramatic. They didn't need to. That was the part that surprised me the most. With Adam, everything moved naturally. Not slow in a frustrating way. Not fast in a reckless way. Just steady. Like we were both paying attention, making sure we didn't miss what this actually was. We started seeing each other almost every day. Not in some planned, rigid schedule. More like, hey, you free? Or walk. Or even just come over. And somehow we always were. A few days after the cafe, I ended up at his place again. This time, it felt different walking in. Less like I was stepping into a stranger's space. More like I already knew where things were supposed to be. You're getting comfortable here, Adam said, watching me drop onto his couch like I'd done it 100 times. I adapt quickly, I replied. Dangerous trait. You said that before. Still true. He moved around the kitchen, grabbing 2 glasses of water without asking. That detail didn't go unnoticed. You always assume I'm thirsty? I asked. You always are, he said, handing me one. I took it, raising an eyebrow. You don't know that. I do, he said simply. And for some reason, that small confidence stuck with me. We sat in that same familiar silence again, but now it wasn't new. It was something we'd already built. Arm? I asked. Better, he said. Still annoying. Good. You're very invested in my recovery. Someone has to make sure you don't make bad decisions. He smiled faintly. Too late for that. I looked at him. Yeah, I said quietly. Probably. That shifted something. Not dramatically. Just enough. Can I ask you something? He said after a moment. Again. I'm noticing a pattern, he replied. Go ahead. He leaned back slightly, studying me. Why does this feel easy? He asked. I frowned a little. Easy? Yeah, he said. Not simple. Just not forced. I thought about it. Because we're not trying to make it something it's not, I said. He nodded slowly. And we're not pretending it's nothing either, I added. Right, he said. That. There was a pause. Then he looked at me more seriously. I've had things before that started fast, he said. But they burned out just as fast. I didn't interrupt. This doesn't feel like that, he continued. No, I said. It doesn't. He held my gaze for a second. Why? He asked. I let out a quiet breath. Because we're actually seeing each other, I said. Not just the idea of each other. That landed. I could tell. He didn't respond right away, but something in his expression softened again, like that answer mattered more than he expected. Later that evening, we ended up back in the park. Same path. Different feeling. This time, there was no hesitation. No questioning why we were there. We just walked. You know what's weird? Adam said. What? This place doesn't feel the same anymore. I glanced around. Yeah, I said. I noticed that too. It used to just be nothing, he said. Now it feels like something happened here. Something did happen. He looked at me. Yeah, he said quietly. It did. We slowed down near the same spot, the pothole still there, like some kind of marker. Should we report that? I asked. Absolutely not, he said immediately. Why? It's part of the story now. I laughed under my breath. That's a terrible reason. Best one I've got. We stopped walking. Again, just like before. But this time, it didn't feel uncertain. It felt clear. I keep thinking about something, he said. What? That night, he replied. How easily it could have gone differently. Yeah. You could have kept walking. You could have taken a different route. Exactly. There was a pause. And then this wouldn't exist, he said. I nodded slowly. But it does, I said. He held my gaze. Yeah, he said. It does. That word again. Exists. It felt important. Kevin, he said after a moment. Yeah. I'm not good at this part, he admitted. What part? The part where something starts to matter and you have to decide what to do with it, he said. I stepped a little closer, not touching, just closing the space slightly. You don't have to decide everything right now, I said. I know, he replied. But I don't want to mess it up. You won't, I said. You don't know that. I don't, I admitted. But I know we're not pretending. That's already better than most things. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said. It is. A quiet moment passed. Then, can I try something? He asked. There was something careful in his tone. Depends what it is, I said. He smiled faintly. Nothing dramatic, he said. And then, slowly, he reached for my hand. Not sudden, not rushed, just intentional. His fingers brushed mine first, like he was giving me time to pull away. I didn't. Our hands settled together, naturally, like they'd already figured it out before we did. He exhaled quietly. Okay, he said, almost to himself. I looked at him. You good? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, he said. I just needed to know if this felt as real as it does in my head. And? I asked. He met my eyes. It does. Something in my chest tightened, but not in a bad way. In a right way? We didn't let go right away. We didn't need to. Because for the first time, this wasn't just something that happened to us. It was something we were choosing. And whatever this was, it wasn't an accident anymore. Step at a time. After that night, everything became clearer. Not easier in a simple way. Not perfect, but defined. There was no more question of what this is. Now it was about what we do with it. A few days later, Adam stayed over at my place for the first time. It wasn't planned in some big, intentional way. We were just sitting on my couch, talking about nothing important, when it got late enough that leaving felt unnecessary. You can stay, I said casually. He looked at me for a second, not surprised, just considering. Yeah, he asked. Yeah. A small pause. Then he nodded. Okay. And just like that, it happened. My apartment felt different with him in it. Not crowded. Not unfamiliar. Just fuller. Like something had shifted slightly into place. You've got less stuff than I expected, he said, looking around. That's because I throw things out instead of dealing with them, I replied. Healthy. Very. He smiled, then moved toward the window, glancing outside like he was taking everything in. You do this a lot? He asked. Have people over unexpectedly? Yeah. No, I said. Not really. He turned to look at me. Okay, he said quietly. That word again. Simple. But it always felt like it meant more when he said it. We didn't rush anything. We didn't need to. We just existed in the same space. At one point, he ended up sitting closer to me than before, not forced, not intentional. Just naturally drifting there as the conversation slowed. You ever think about how weird this is? He asked. All the time, I said. And you're still here. So are you. He nodded slightly. Yeah, he said. I am. Later, when everything got quieter, we moved to my room. Not because anything dramatic was happening, just because it made sense. You sure? He asked, stopping near the doorway. I looked at him. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. He nodded, stepping inside. There was something different in the air now. Not tense, just aware. We sat on the edge of the bed at first, talking a little more, like neither of us wanted to rush past the moment. I've been thinking, he said. That's always dangerous. Yeah, he smiled faintly. But this time it's not bad. Good. He looked at me, more serious now. I don't want this to be something that just happens and then fades, he said. It won't be, I replied. You don't know that. I know we're not treating it like something disposable, I said. That already makes it different. He held my gaze. Yeah, he said. It does. There was a pause. Then he reached for my hand again. No hesitation this time. Just certainty. I'm in this, he said quietly. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just real. I felt something settle in my chest. Me too, I said. At some point, the conversation faded. Not because we ran out of things to say, but because we didn't need to fill the space anymore. We lay there, not sleeping yet, just present. I keep going back to that night, he said softly. The park. Yeah. What about it? He exhaled slowly. How random it felt at the time, he said. And how not random it feels now. I nodded slightly. I get that. It feels like something that was supposed to happen, he added. I turned my head to look at him. You believe that? I didn't before, he said. But now. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The next morning was quiet. Soft light coming through the window, the kind that makes everything feel slower. I woke up first. For a second, I just lay there, trying to place the feeling. Then I remembered. And instead of that usual hesitation, what now? What does this mean? There was none of that. Just calm. Adam shifted slightly beside me, waking up a few seconds later. Hey, he said, voice still rough with sleep. Hey. He blinked a couple times, then looked at me properly, and smiled. Not uncertain, not confused, just sure. You still here, he said. Yeah. Good. That was it. No overthinking. No second guessing. Just that. Later, as we stood in the kitchen, half awake, drinking coffee that neither of us had fully processed yet, he leaned against the counter and looked at me. You realize this isn't just a random thing anymore, right? He said. Yeah, I replied. I do. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. There it was again. That quiet confirmation. Like we were both choosing this again and again. Before he left, we stood near the door for a second longer than necessary. Not awkward. Just holding the moment. I'll see you later, he asked. Yeah, I said. You will. He smiled slightly. Good. And then he stepped out. I closed the door behind him and stood there for a second, thinking about how close it had all come to not happening. One missed moment. One decision to keep walking. And none of this would exist. But it did. And now, it wasn't fragile anymore. It wasn't accidental. It was something real. Something chosen. Something that started with a random rescue and turned into something neither of us was willing to let go of. It didn't fall apart. That was the thing I kept waiting for, even when I told myself I wasn't. Some part of me expected the shift, the moment where things would suddenly feel too real, too complicated, and one of us would pull back. Not dramatically, just enough to change everything. But it didn't happen. Instead, things kept building. Quietly. Steadily. A couple weeks later, we were back in the park again. Same path. Same place. But it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. It felt like ours. You realize we keep ending up here, Adam said, slowing down near the pothole. We could pick a new spot, I replied. He shook his head immediately. No, this one matters. I smiled faintly. You're still attached to the pothole? It started everything, he said. I'm not disrespecting that. That's a wild sentence. Accurate, though. We stopped walking, both of us glancing down at the same cracked piece of pavement that had somehow changed both of our lives. It's weird, he said. What is? How something that small can change everything, he replied. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. It is. We moved to the bench after that, sitting a little closer than the first time we'd been there. No hesitation now. No questioning. Just us. I've been thinking about something, he said. That's always a concern. He ignored that, focused. That night, when you stopped, he said. You said it felt like you'd regret it if you didn't. Yeah. He looked at me. I think that was the moment everything split, he said. Split. Two versions of how this could have gone, he explained. One where you keep walking. One where you don't. I leaned back slightly, thinking about it. Yeah, I said. I can see that. And we're here because you didn't, he added. I held his gaze. Because we both didn't, I corrected. That mattered. I could tell it did. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. Because we both didn't. A quiet settled between us. Not empty. Just full of everything we didn't need to say anymore. After a moment, he spoke again, quieter this time. I don't think this was an accident. I raised an eyebrow slightly. You're really leaning into that idea. I am, he admitted. Because it doesn't feel random anymore. I studied him for a second. What does it feel like then? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, like something that was supposed to find me, he said. That landed deeper than anything else he'd said so far. I didn't deflect it. Didn't joke. Yeah, I said quietly. I feel that too. He shifted slightly, turning toward me more fully. I've had things before that felt good, he said. But this feels right. There was no hesitation in his voice. No uncertainty. Just clarity. I know, I said. And I meant it. A couple walked past again, just like before. Same kind of quiet laughter. Same kind of normal. But this time, I didn't feel separate from it. I felt like I was part of something just as real. Kevin, he said. Yeah. I'm glad it was you. Simple. But it hit harder than anything else. Yeah. I asked. He nodded. Yeah. I looked at him, really looked. And I realized something. This wasn't just about that night anymore. It wasn't just about the accident, or the timing, or the fact that we happened to be in the same place at the same time. It was about what we did after. The choice to stay. To come back. To not ignore something just because it showed up unexpectedly. I'm glad it was you too, I said. We sat there a little longer, neither of us in a rush. Because there was nowhere else we needed to be. Eventually, we stood up and started walking again. Not back the way we came. Just forward. Side by side. Like we had been since the moment everything started. Hey, he said after a while. Yeah. You ever think about how close this came to not existing at all? All the time, I admitted. And I exhaled quietly. Makes me pay attention more, I said. To things I'd usually ignore. He nodded. Yeah, he said. Same. A pause. Then he added. I don't think I'm going to ignore things like that anymore. I glanced at him. Good, I said. Our hands found each other again, not hesitantly this time. Just naturally. Like it had already become part of us. And that's how it ended. Not with something dramatic. Not with some perfect, cinematic moment. But with something better. Something real. Two people who almost passed each other by. And didn't. A random night. A small decision. A moment that could have meant nothing. But became everything. Because sometimes, the most important connections don't start with intention. They start with one choice. To stop.